What is up, guys? Marcellus Williams, aka TheSwolefessor, here to educate you on health, fitness, social well-being. And today, guys, on screen, you're going to see a workout from last week. This is what day 3 on my current menstrual cycle looks like. You're going to see that Maria joined me for the entire workout and that Michael joined us for the accessories. Keep in mind, what Maria does on squats and bench is going to be different than what I'm doing, just because I followed the usual protocol for this day, whereas Maria was her first time being back in the gym in a while, and was actually her first time back squatting, I want to say, in a few months due to recovering from an injury. So due to that, she was kind of just easing into things, getting some volume in, just working on the movement patterns. Now, with that out of the way, let's get into the actual topic of this video, which is pretty much 5 things that I think you should always keep in mind whenever you're performing or doing research related to, health or fitness. And the reason I want to do this, guys, is because, the quote-unquote evidence-based community seems to be getting, a little bit bigger on YouTube and like with social media as a whole. We are starting to see a trend where there's still a lot of bro science out there, but there's, more people are coming out trying to have like informative content. And then beyond that, there's a lot of people who, even if they don't have their own channels, they like to get into arguments and debates with people, try to discuss science, research, and everything like that. And of course, me being me, I'm all about that. I'm fine with that. But the problem is, I feel like the evidence-based community as a whole is sort of becoming just as bad as the bro scientists, in the sense of you have a lot of people where they're quick to say things like, well, I read a research article that says this, or this lab study said this, or had this conclusion, but they don't have any actual understanding of what they're talking about, meaning they're just repeating it because it's something that they read, or they're repeating it because it's something that an informative YouTuber maybe said to them, but they don't actually understand the concepts of what they're talking about. Like if you were to ask them, okay, well, what were the parameters of that study? Like, how does this study actually apply to what we're talking about? They wouldn't have an answer for you, which really isn't any better than when, your typical bro tells you, oh, well, I do this because my favorite bodybuilder told me to do this, but they have no understanding of what they're actually doing or if it's effective or not. So pretty much, I just want to give you guys like 5 points that I came up with, and granted, there's a lot more to, than just these points when it comes to doing adequate research, but this is going to give you a good base to really help you when it comes to doing, proper research, and when it comes to actually looking at this stuff with an objective mindset, using critical thinking basically, instead of just repeating things that you've read or heard. So the first point, guys, is to have a basic understanding of anatomy, physiology, and biomechanics. This is huge, just because a lot of people jump the gun when it comes to this stuff. They're so quick to want to dive into all these research and look at all these studies when they won't even understand the basic principles behind these studies. Like, it doesn't do you any good to just say, oh, well, everyone's squat stance is going to look a little bit different, but you don't understand why. If somebody asks you, well, why is that? Why can't we all just squat the same? You won't be able to answer that if you don't understand anatomy, anthropometry, morphology. If you understand, that different people have different hip structures, right? It doesn't do you any good to look at a study that says, hey, we had this group of people reduce their bread intake and they all lost weight, because then you're going to be left confused or have the mindset of like, oh, so the key to losing weight is not eating bread, or oh, the key to losing weight is just not eating carbs as a whole, instead of understanding that because they reduced their total caloric intake in some form or another, whether it was bread or something else, that is why they lost weight. But because you don't understand basic physiology, you don't understand calories in versus calories out, you're not even going to get that. Or that's why you have people who will say things like, oh, well, like, eating carbs spikes your insulin, like, which is true, but that's a temporary hormonal change, which in the grand scheme of things doesn't have an impact on your weight gain or weight loss, nowhere near as much as something like if you're in a caloric deficit or caloric surplus. But if you don't have an understanding of physiology, if you don't understand the endocrine system and how these hormones work and the difference between long-term effects and short-term effects, then you're not going to understand that. Or with the biomechanics aspect, you have people who say crazy things like, oh, the bench press isn't a good exercise for the chest. Why? Because that's just something that they heard somebody else say. And it's not to say that the bench press is the best exercise for the chest. If you want to debate that, that's fine. But to say that it's not a good exercise for the chest lets me know that you, 1, don't have a good understanding of the anatomy of the chest, and 2, don't understand basic biomechanics in terms of how it works and why the bench press is an excellent exercise for the chest. So that's the first thing, guys. It's kind of like somebody who wants to get involved in engineering or chemistry courses at school, but they don't even have a basic understanding of math. They don't even understand addition, multiplication, subtraction, but they want to jump into these advanced formulas when it comes to like chemistry and engineering. It's just not going to work out, guys. So the first point is to have a basic understanding of anatomy, physiology, and biomechanics. Buy a textbook. go research these things online. Like, there's so many different sources you can use, but it's important to have an actual understanding of these basic principles. So that way, when you're doing research, if you see something that goes against these basic principles, you can already know that, okay, chances are what I'm reading isn't even like actually valid. Because like, there's a lot of stuff out there, guys. There's a lot of stuff out there. A lot of it's valid, and a lot of it simply isn't. The second point, guys, is to understand that actual research takes time and effort. In other words, it goes beyond just reading a few articles. It goes beyond watching a couple of YouTube videos and suddenly thinking that you're an expert on something. You guys have to understand that a lot of these topics that I talk to you about, I didn't just go read one article. I didn't just go Google a topic really quickly and then learn it. The reason I'm able to like push record and just talk to you guys about a lot of these topics, you know, without like having a script in my hand and stuff like that, is because I've taken the time to do thorough research over these topics. It takes time, guys. Hours out of your day sometimes. And it's not to say that you have to go to that extreme, and it's not to say that you have to understand all of these things like to their absolute depth and understand every complex topic of everything to apply it. Like, for example, you don't have to understand all the complexities that go into calories in versus calories out. You don't have to understand all the complexities of progressive overload in order to apply those things to your training, to your nutrition, to your lifestyle. But if you want to talk about it from a research standpoint, then yeah, you're going to have to take the time to actually read over these things, to read over multiple studies, to look at meta-analysis that looks at collective data, because just looking at one article and thinking that it's the end all be all of everything is a quick way to look foolish. Because the reality is, you can read one article or look at one study, but that could have been a poorly written article or a poorly done study. Just because the word study is in it, or because, like, you know, the term science is used, because everybody likes to throw that term around now, like, right, like this is the best science for this or science for that, doesn't actually make it true or valid. At the end of the day, that's just a word. It's not the same thing as going through the actual actions to see if what you're saying is factually backed by science. So that's the second point to keep in mind, guys. Research takes time. If you want to really get a better understanding of these things, you're going to have to take the time to read and look at several different studies and several different articles over these points. The third point, guys, is going to be that when you are researching, you have to keep an open mind, so long as the research doesn't go against the basic principles of point one. Meaning, you have to understand that sometimes you're going to read things or come across things that you may have never heard before. Nobody knows it all. I don't know it all. Like, no matter how many years we spend in this, there's new information coming out all the time. There's always different things that we're building upon. And sometimes some of the topics that we come out with may not even be built upon something that you've heard of before. So keep in mind that that doesn't mean you automatically dismiss it, so long as it's not going against those basic principles that we understand in relation to anatomy, physiology, biomechanics. Why? Because those are things that we already know and understand to be true. They've been factually proven. Facts don't negate one another. So therefore, if somebody's saying something, or you're reading an article, or you're looking at a study that's stating something that clearly goes against a basic principle of anatomy or physiology or biomechanics, then in that case, yeah, 9 times out of 10, you're not going to have any issues if you dismiss that. I would still suggest reading through it just so you can understand how to properly debunk certain things. But the reality is, it's okay at that point if you kind of dismiss it. But if it doesn't go against those things, just because it's something you've never heard before, doesn't make it true, and it doesn't make it any less valid. That's how you learn. You have to have an open mindset and think critically when you're looking at this stuff and be like, okay, even though I've never heard about this, let me think about the things that I do know and understand and see how these things can work together. Let me see how these things can apply. And that's a huge thing, guys, that a lot of people just don't do. A lot of people just go in with a confirmation bias, and if they hear something that goes against what they know, then they don't want to they don't have anything to do with it. And that's what comes down to point number 4, which is seek what is true and seek what is optimal, even if it goes against your confirmation bias. Meaning, when we're looking at this research, guys, when we're trying to determine, hey, what's the best way to go about this, you can't form these almost religious connections with the things you read. That's the problem that a lot of people have when it comes to nutrition. They form this religious bond with their diet to where they only want to pay attention to the positive aspects of their diet, but they want to ignore any and all research that maybe states that, hey, your diet's not optimal for this, or hey, your diet's not superior when it comes to weight loss. But they don't want to do that. We see this a lot, and this once again isn't to bash people that follow these diets, but for example, people who follow the ketogenic diet. Not to say that there's not some benefits to it. But when people want to go to the point of exaggerating what those benefits are, or when people want to try to point out random facts, like once again, like the insulin spike thing when you're eating carbs without any understanding of like how that actually relates to weight loss as a whole, or when they want to ignore the fact that all the research thus far has shown that the ketogenic diet isn't superior for holding on to muscle mass while cutting, and it's definitely not optimal for building muscle mass. People want to ignore that. It doesn't mean that you can't follow the diet if you find that's what works best personally for you, but to say that this is what's going to be best and optimal for everyone when that simply isn't the case just isn't good practice, guys. So when you're doing these research, have an open mind. Everyone has a little bit of confirmation bias anyway. Like for example, if you're somebody who likes to train a certain way, then you're gonna be more geared towards looking at things that you know agree with what you're saying or that show good points for the way that you train. But you have to be objective. You have to think critically when it comes to a lot of this stuff. Like for example, it's easy to want to be somebody that says, hey, you always have to lift heavy. You know, you have to lift like in the 3 to 5 rep range to build muscle, or oh, you have to lift in the 8 to 12 rep range to build muscle, if that's the way that you train. But you guys already know that the research shows that it comes down to total volume done. Rep ranges in themselves don't matter when it comes to building muscle. They matter for performance. You're going to get better at whatever rep range you train in. If you train with lower rep ranges, you're definitely going to get stronger than if you're training with higher rep ranges only. And if you're training with higher rep ranges, you're going to be better at training at higher rep ranges, and you know, probably have a little bit better muscular endurance than if you only train with lower rep ranges. However, when it comes to building muscle, it's about total volume, right? Total work done. The sets times the reps times the weight. So the reps in of themselves don't matter. So you have to get out of your own confirmation bias with how you personally train and acknowledge the truth of that. That's very important. And point number 5, guys, which is the final point I want to make in this video, is to keep in mind that research and studies are only as good as their application to real life training or their applications to your goals. And what I mean by that, guys, is that a lot of people will read a study, right? And they'll look at the conclusions, but they won't, once again, pay attention to the parameters. Meaning, if that study is something that could only have been done in the lab, where the parameters they were using are things that can only be done in the lab, meaning it's unrealistic to think that you can follow the same parameters outside of a lab where everything is controlled, then it may not be the most applicable study to what your goals are. Or if a study is done over, you know, an obese population, and you know that you're not obese, you can't assume that what the findings were for them is going to be the same results for you. Or if a study's done over, hey, we had these high-level advanced athletes trained this way and they got these results, you can't assume that you're going to get the same results if you're not a genetically elite high advanced athlete. So it's just important to keep that in mind, guys, right? Like, even though this is an extreme, if I were to come up with a study that says, hey, doing 20,000 crunches a day will give everybody a perfect six-pack, regardless of body fat percentage, regardless of genetic makeup, etc. Even if I could somehow scientifically prove that in the lab, it doesn't matter, because how many people have the time out of their day to do 20,000 crunches? How many people are going to take the time out of the day to do 20,000 crunches? Most of them simply aren't, guys. So it's important to just keep that in mind, that at the end of the day, you have to think critically about how much of this stuff is actually applicable to what you're doing, and how much of the research and the studies you're looking at is actually applicable to your goals. But yeah, guys, those are my 5 points. Hopefully I made all those clear. If not, you guys already know that any questions you have, you can leave in the comments down below. But I hope that you guys kind of get where I'm coming from and understand the importance of this type of stuff. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, go ahead and leave a comment down below. Let me know what you did. If you did not, leave a comment down below. Let me know what I can do to get better. Like the video, share, subscribe, keep it simple, specific, scientific, and I'll catch y'all later.